who asks to borrow a crayon from a quiet boy on a train and ends up changing both of their lives forever. That's exactly what happened to Lauren Cohen, a tired girl in thrifted clothes who sat down after her janitor shift, expecting nothing but silence on her ride home. But when she smiled at the boy beside her and asked for the green crayon he was holding, something shifted. She didn't know the boy hadn't spoken to anyone in months. She didn't know his father, the man quietly watching, was a millionaire who had stopped believing in connection. And she definitely didn't know she was about to become their missing piece. Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness, a borrowed crayon, is all it takes to restart a heart. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The rain had already stopped, but the sky above the city still looked like wet concrete. Low, heavy, unmoving. Lauren Cohen tugged her oversized coat tighter around her shoulders as she stepped onto the train. Her boots were damp from the walk, and her socks squished faintly with each step. She didn't mind. Not really. Not after scrubbing 3 entire floors of office bathrooms overnight, and knowing the kids at Maple Lane would be waiting for stories and finger painting in just a few hours. Vending machine coffee had to carry her through both worlds. Car 3. Last row. She always picked the seat near the broken heater vent. Not because it was comfortable, but because it was warm, and warm was rare. She sat, exhaled, and leaned her head against the cold glass. The city was already slipping past the window, its edges soft in the early gray light. The train rocked into motion with its usual rhythm, the kind that blurred thoughts and made tired muscles sink deeper into seats. She closed her eyes for a breath, and that's when she noticed him. A boy, maybe 6 years old, sandy hair, knees pulled up, a spiral notebook propped on his lap, and in his small right hand a green crayon. He was drawing, slowly, carefully, circles and swirls with no clear picture. Just motion, repetition. Lauren blinked. He looked like someone deep inside his own world. No phone, no tablet, no snacks, just that notebook, just that crayon. No one sat beside him, except a man 2 seats back, watching. He was dressed in a charcoal coat and dark jeans, and he wasn't scrolling or reading or typing. He was just watching the boy with stillness and a kind of quiet protectiveness that made Lauren think. Father. She didn't mean to stare, but the boy looked up and their eyes met. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just studied her like she wasn't quite real. Lauren gave him a small smile. Soft, friendly, no pressure. Then she pointed to the crayon and said, "That's a great color. Mind if I borrow it for a second?" He hesitated. Then, without speaking, he leaned forward and placed the crayon in her outstretched palm. Her fingers closed around it carefully. "Thank you," she said. "That's very generous." She rummaged in her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled receipt, the only scrap of paper she had. With her knee as a desk, she started sketching a tree. Nothing special, just a trunk, branches, and then, with his crayon, she added bright green leaves. When she was done, she turned the receipt and slid it back to him. "It was missing something," she said. "You helped me fix it." The boy stared at the paper, then back at her, and something softened in his eyes. He held the receipt with both hands like it was made of gold. Then he carefully laid it beside his notebook and returned to his seat. Lauren turned her gaze back to the window, trying not to overthink the moment. But she felt it, like warmth blooming quietly in her chest. She looked up once more and caught the man's eyes. He was watching her now, and there was something in his expression that surprised her. Not curiosity, not wariness, but recognition, like she had done something rare. "His name is Dylan," the man said quietly. Lauren looked over. "He's wonderful. I'm Curtis," he added. "Lauren, nice to meet you." They rode in silence for a while, the kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, just full, like both of them were thinking too much to speak. Then a jolt. The train screeched to a halt. The lights flickered. The conductor's voice crackled over the speaker. "We apologize for the inconvenience. A fallen tree is blocking the tracks ahead. Please remain seated while we wait for clearance." A few groans. Someone cursed. Lauren sat up straighter, unsure what to do with the stillness. Beside her, Dylan clutched his notebook. She glanced at him, saw how his little shoulders had tensed, and without thinking, she leaned forward slightly. "You know," she said softly, "this reminds me of a story." The boy looked at her. Curtis tilted his head. "A long time ago," she began, voice gentle, "there was a little dinosaur who rode trains all across the land, but he was scared of trees. He thought they might fall on the tracks and stop everything forever. So every time he saw one, he'd close his eyes and whisper, 'Please move, Mr. Tree. I've got places to go.'" Dylan blinked. "And you know what?" Lauren smiled. "One day the tree did move, because the dinosaur had made friends with the wind. And the wind told the tree, 'You're blocking someone brave.'" Curtis let out a short breath, the closest thing to a laugh she'd heard from him. Lauren leaned back. "So maybe this tree just needed a minute. It'll move soon." The train rumbled again, slowly. The boy looked at her, and this time he smiled. Not big, just real. Then he did something completely unexpected. He stood and walked to her seat. Without a word, Dylan wrapped his arms around her waist. Curtis stood instantly startled. "Dylan," but he didn't finish. He froze in place as his son hugged a stranger, and Lauren, stunned, motionless, let herself receive it. The hug was small, but it undid her, and as the train began to move again, slow and steady, Dylan stayed there for a moment longer, and then quietly returned to his seat. Curtis looked at her, speechless. Lauren swallowed. "He's special," she said, barely above a whisper. Curtis nodded once. "So are you." And the train rolled on. Dylan returned to his seat beside his father, notebook on his lap, green crayon clutched tight in one hand like it had become something sacred. Curtis watched him, watched the way his son stared at the drawing Lauren had given him. A simple tree with bright green leaves. It wasn't professional. It wasn't even particularly neat, but Dylan treated it like it was precious. Curtis cleared his throat. "That was unexpected." Lauren smiled softly. "The hug," he nodded, "and the thank you." He hasn't said a full sentence in weeks. She blinked. "But he just did. That's the thing." Curtis leaned forward slightly. "He chooses his words like they cost something. So when he speaks, he means it." Curtis studied her face. "Exactly." Lauren looked out the window. The train passed a blur of autumn-colored trees, gold and rust in the morning light. It was beautiful but distant, like something she could admire but never quite touch. "He's a good kid," she murmured. Curtis smiled faintly. "He's everything." Dylan glanced up at Lauren. Then, to everyone's surprise, he asked, "What happened next?" Lauren turned, eyebrows raised. "Next?" The boy nodded, eyes wide. "With the dinosaur." Curtis looked just as surprised as she felt. He mouthed, "He wants more?" Lauren leaned in a little, as if letting him into a secret. "Oh," she whispered. "You mean the dinosaur who talked to the tree?" Dylan gave a tiny nod, his eyes full of hope. She exhaled thoughtfully. "Let me think." She leaned back, tucked her legs under the seat, and rested her chin in her hand like a professional storyteller settling in for a long tale. "Well," she began, "after the tree moved and the dinosaur's train got going again, he thought everything would be easy. He was proud. He'd faced his fear. But then, a tunnel appeared." Dylan's eyes widened. "A long one," she continued, "so dark you couldn't see the end." The little dinosaur started to panic. He thought, "What if we never come out?" But then the lights inside the train flicked on. She glanced at Dylan, and he noticed that sitting across from him was a boy. Not just any boy. A boy with a notebook and magic crayons. Curtis grinned softly. "This boy didn't talk much," Lauren said, voice gentle. "But he had a way of showing people what mattered. So he drew the tunnel. But instead of making it scary, he filled it with stars. He made the dinosaur a flashlight hat. And suddenly, the tunnel wasn't frightening. It was full of possibilities." Dylan's face lit up. "And that's how the little dinosaur realized something important," Lauren finished. "When you ride the train with the right person, even tunnels become beautiful." Dylan opened his notebook immediately. He flipped to a blank page and began drawing. Curtis and Lauren watched in silence as he sketched. Quick, deliberate lines forming shapes. A hat, a dinosaur, a glowing beam of light, stars inside a tunnel. Then a boy sitting across, holding a green crayon. Lauren blinked. "Is that me?" Dylan paused. "No," she laughed. "Oh, okay." Then he pointed to the dinosaur with the flashlight hat. "That's you." Curtis's eyes softened. Lauren's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Then Dylan handed her the page and whispered, "Thank you, Ms. Dinosaur." Curtis turned his head away, pretending to check his phone. He didn't want her to see his eyes. Lauren stared at the drawing in her lap. It wasn't perfect. A bit wobbly, a little smudged, but it meant more than anything anyone had given her in a long, long time. She folded it gently and tucked it into the inside pocket of her coat. "Thank you," she said softly. Dylan didn't answer. He was already drawing again. The ride continued in a comfortable hush. Curtis eventually opened a small snack box and offered it around. Lauren hesitated but took a piece of dried mango. Dylan handed her his juice box without asking. She took a sip, pretended it was champagne, and toasted them both. Dylan giggled. A tiny sound, like a bird clearing its throat. They didn't talk about big things, just crayons, favorite animals, the weirdest shaped cloud they'd ever seen. Lauren didn't mention she was heading to a community shelter after this. Curtis didn't mention he was a CEO with meetings and mergers waiting. It didn't matter. In that train car, for those minutes that stretched like a pocket of quiet time, they were just three people on a ride, sharing space, and something else unspoken. Next stop, Westridge. Doors will open on the left. Lauren sat up straighter. "Oh," she said, "that's me." Dylan looked at her. Curtis did too. "Really?" he asked. She nodded, smoothing her coat. "Got a shift." Dylan closed his notebook quickly, like he didn't want the story to stop. Lauren smiled, trying to hide the ache rising in her chest. She stood, brushing invisible lint from her sleeves. "It was nice meeting you both," she said, her voice carefully light. "Thanks for sharing your crayons." She turned to step away, but Dylan tugged at her coat. She stopped. He held out a folded sheet of paper. She took it, opened it. It was a dinosaur again, this time waving from a train window. Underneath, in shaky handwriting, "Come back soon. The train gets scared without you." Lauren's lips trembled. She crouched and hugged him again, tightly, then stood and nodded at Curtis. "Bye," she whispered, and stepped off the train. Curtis didn't move. Dylan stared at the spot she'd just vacated. Outside the window, Lauren turned once and waved, then disappeared into the crowd. Curtis looked down. On the seat between them, her notebook, worn, bent at the edges. Forgotten? Or left behind on purpose? Curtis stared down at the notebook she left behind. It was small, spiral-bound, with a cracked plastic cover and a corner that had been chewed by time or maybe a dog. There was no name on it, no title, just a half-peeled sticker of a sunflower on the front, faded and frayed at the edges. He hadn't meant to touch it, but Dylan was asleep, head against the window, crayons still tucked in his fingers, and the notebook lay there between them, as if it had chosen to stay behind. Curtis reached for it slowly. His fingers brushed the cover and he froze. Felt personal, like opening someone's diary. But then he thought about her, Lauren, the girl with the cracked boots and crooked smile, the girl his son had hugged, the girl who somehow became a dinosaur in a flashlight hat and made his son laugh. She had left something behind, and Curtis wasn't used to being left with questions. He opened the first page and was not prepared for what he saw. The handwriting was neat, clear, the kind someone teaches themselves to make things feel orderly, even when life isn't. Each page had a short entry, some no more than a sentence, some a paragraph, some drawings in the margins, all dated, all handwritten. The first one, Day 1. Start over. Don't panic. It's okay if you feel like a ghost today. Curtis blinked. He flipped the page. Day 2. 3 more shifts and rent is paid. One day you'll rest. I promise. The next page had a sketch of a cat holding a mop like a sword. Day 5. Don't cry in the supply closet again. But if you do, make it fast. The bleach smells weird. He kept reading. With each page, a clearer picture of Lauren began to form. She was alone, working 2 jobs, sometimes 3, taking care of someone, maybe family, maybe not, trying not to fall apart while patching other people's messes, smiling when she didn't feel like smiling, drawing cartoon animals in the margins to stay sane. She had dreams, of finishing school, of helping people, of having a place with curtains, not blinds, a door that locked, a shelf for books. One entry stopped him cold. Day 14. Pretended I was invisible again. It's safer. But the boy on the bench smiled at me today, like I was real. He didn't realize he was gripping the notebook tighter until the spiral left an imprint in his palm. Curtis leaned back in his seat, notebook open across his lap, heart heavy. He had met women before, models, executives, journalists, all beautiful, all polished, all prepared to meet a man like him. But Lauren, she didn't even know who he was. She hadn't looked at his shoes or his watch. She hadn't asked what he did or where he lived. She'd talked to Dylan. She'd seen Dylan. And now, through this notebook, he was seeing her. Not the girl on the train. Not the one who smiled and told stories. But the girl who spent nights talking herself out of quitting. The girl who needed the world to be kind, even just once. and who had been kind anyway. Dad. Curtis looked up. Dylan was awake, rubbing his eyes. Yeah, Bud. Dylan pointed to the notebook. Curtis hesitated. She left it. Dylan's fingers brushed the sunflower sticker. She forgot. I'm not sure, Curtis said. Maybe. Are we gonna give it back? Curtis looked down at the open pages. He couldn't just leave it at the lost and found. He couldn't throw it in the mail like a package. He needed more. Yes, he said finally. We're going to find her. Dylan nodded like that was the only answer that made sense. That night, after tucking Dylan into bed, Curtis sat in his office, surrounded by glass and steel and everything that once defined him, and read the notebook cover to cover. Not for business, not for strategy, just to feel human. At the end, tucked in the very back pocket, was a folded note, clearly older, worn at the edges. It wasn't dated, just written in the same careful hand. Dear future me, if you're reading this, you probably forgot how brave you are. So let me remind you, you've survived every worst day so far. You've smiled when you could have screamed. You've given more than you had. You're still here. That makes you unstoppable. Love me. Curtis exhaled sharply, his throat tight. He closed the notebook slowly and set it down on his desk. Then he opened his laptop. He had work to do. The next morning, he made a call. Harriet, I need you to run a quiet search. His assistant didn't miss a beat. Name? She didn't give it, Curtis said. But she left behind a notebook. I'll send scans. Got it. I also want someone to check the camera feeds from the Westridge station platform yesterday. She got off around 9:30 a.m. There was a pause on the line. Is this personal? Harriet asked. Curtis looked at the notebook again. It's human, he replied. That afternoon, Dylan sat beside him in the car as they drove through side streets and quiet neighborhoods. Are we gonna find Ms. Dinosaur? He asked. Curtis smiled faintly. We're trying. They passed bakeries, daycares, old buildings with fading paint, and Curtis felt something unfamiliar brewing in his chest. Something between nerves and hope. She didn't leave a number, but she left her heart. And he wasn't going to let that go. Not this time. Not ever. The Maple Lane Learning Center didn't look like much from the outside. Just a low brick building with a crooked sign, faded flower pots, and a hand-painted banner that read, "You matter here." Curtis stepped out of the car slowly, Dylan's hand tucked firmly in his own. It had taken 3 days, a bit of luck, and a comment under a viral post to get here. Someone had recognized Lauren's drawing, the tree with green leaves. They'd seen it hanging in a hallway, right beside a coat rack filled with tiny jackets and a basket of unmatched mittens. Dylan had perked up the second he heard the words drawing and tree. Curtis had wasted no time. Now he stood in front of the building, trying to remember how to breathe. You ready, Bud? He asked. Dylan nodded once. They walked up the steps together and pushed open the door. Warmth hit them first, not from the heater but from the sound. Laughter. Children's voices. Someone humming a Disney song. It smelled like crayons and applesauce and something sweet baking in a distant kitchen. A receptionist glanced up from behind a counter covered in glitter and sticky notes. Hi there, she said. Do you have an appointment? Not exactly, Curtis replied, suddenly unsure what to say. The woman raised a brow. I'm looking for someone. I think she works here. Her name's Lauren. The woman smiled. Lauren Cohen? He exhaled. Yes, she's here. She comes in twice a week to help with art time. Curtis's heart stuttered. She's here. I'm sorry, what's your name? Before he could answer, a child bolted past them wearing fairy wings and a plastic fireman's hat. Dylan's eyes widened in amusement. The woman glanced at the chaos, then turned back to them. Come on. She's probably in room B. Just down the hall. Turn left at the jungle mural. The hallway was painted in handprints, animals, and crooked stars. Dylan traced his fingers along the wall as they walked. Curtis stopped in front of the open door. Inside, Lauren sat cross-legged on a colorful rug surrounded by 6 children. She wore jeans, a paint-smeared sweatshirt, and a clip holding her hair back. In her lap was a pile of paper dinosaur cutouts. The kids were coloring them with reckless joy. Okay, she said, laughing. But what if the T-Rex wore roller skates? One girl gasped. Then he'd go so fast. Exactly, Lauren said. Let's draw that. Curtis couldn't move. He watched the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, the way the children leaned in like planets pulled by gravity. Dylan didn't wait. He stepped into the room. Lauren looked up and froze. Her smile faltered, then came back 10 times brighter. Hey, she breathed. It's you. Dylan nodded solemnly, then marched across the room, held out a folded paper, and placed it in her lap. Lauren unfolded it. It was the same dinosaur she'd seen in her imagination, now roller skating, wearing sunglasses, and holding a green crayon. She laughed, not politely, not softly, a real laugh, deep and startled. Then she looked up at Curtis. You found me. He stepped inside slowly. I wasn't sure I would. How? He hesitated. You left your notebook. She blinked, then touched her coat pocket instinctively, already knowing it was true. I didn't mean to. I read it. She stiffened. Curtis lifted his hands slightly. I know I shouldn't have, but it felt like a gift, like you were letting someone in. Lauren glanced at the children, who had now migrated toward a corner filled with blocks and chaos. She rose, brushing her hands on her jeans. That notebook wasn't meant for anyone, she said quietly. I know. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. I didn't want that, Curtis said. I couldn't let it end on a train platform. Lauren looked down at the drawing Dylan had given her. He's been drawing dinosaurs every day since you left, Curtis added. Her throat tightened. Really? He named one Lorenosaurus. She laughed again, this time gentler. There was a silence between them, soft, full. Then Lauren asked, Why did you come? Curtis hesitated. Because I think you changed something. In me. In him. And I haven't stopped thinking about it. She crossed her arms, not defensively, just grounding herself. I'm not sure I'm anyone worth chasing down, she whispered. You are, he said simply. The door creaked as another teacher peeked in. Lauren, we need backup. Glitter emergency. Lauren smiled. Be right there. She looked at Curtis one last time. You can stay, if you want. He nodded. We'd like that. That afternoon they stayed. Curtis helped clean up spilled juice. Dylan helped tape drawings to the wall. Lauren taught them how to fold paper into tiny hats. And for a while, it didn't matter who was rich or tired or broken. They were just people, helping each other through the mess of crayons and second chances. The first thing Lauren noticed when she opened the door that evening was her father's boots. They were by the heater, scuffed, worn, still damp from the drizzle outside. She hadn't expected him home so early. The second thing she noticed was silence. No kettle whistling. No hum of the old radio tuned to some jazz station from another decade. Just the muffled creak of floorboards and the slow rhythm of rain against the windows. She stepped into the living room. Her father was seated at the small table, his back rigid, eyes fixed on something in front of him. Her heart tightened the moment she saw what it was. Her notebook, the one she'd thought she lost, the one Curtis must have returned. And next to it, a printout, a photo of Curtis, in a suit, standing beside a man Lauren recognized from old newspaper clippings. The caption read, "Armstrong and Son donate $5 million to tech hospital expansion." Her mouth went dry. "Dad?" she started. He didn't look up. "Is that the man from the train?" Lauren nodded slowly. "Yes." His hands curled into fists on the table. "And you didn't think to ask his last name?" "I didn't care." "Well, I did," he snapped. She flinched. He stood, the chair groaning as he pushed back. "I worked for his father, Lauren, for 22 years. Built my life around that job. Trusted him. You were just a kid when it happened." Her throat tightened. "When what happened?" He laughed, hollow and sharp. "He laid off 60 men with no warning. Shut down the entire division. Pensions disappeared. Promises vanished. And he didn't even have the guts to come down to the floor and tell us himself. Sent someone else." He pointed to the photo. "To him. Curtis Armstrong." She stepped back slightly, her voice shaking. "But that's not Curtis. That's his father. Curtis isn't like that." "How do you know?" he challenged. "You met him once. On a train." She looked away. "I've seen how he is with Dylan. He listens. He sees people." Her father's eyes narrowed. "People like you?" She felt like the air had been punched out of her. "Don't mistake kindness for love, Lauren. Especially from men like that. They give just enough to make you feel special. Then they leave. Or worse, they stay and take everything." His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was tired, wounded. "Please," he said. "I can't watch you walk into the same fire I spent decades crawling out of." Lauren didn't respond. She walked past him quietly, heart cracking with every step. That night, she sat on the fire escape, notebook in her lap, knees pulled to her chest. She didn't draw. She didn't write. She just sat, letting the cold metal seep into her bones. Curtis had changed something in her. Dylan, too. She'd started imagining things again, soft things, possible things. But now her father's voice rang in her head. "Don't mistake kindness for love." She wasn't sure if it was a warning or a prophecy. Meanwhile, across the city, Curtis sat in the back of a car with Dylan asleep against his shoulder. His phone buzzed. It was Harriet. He answered quietly. "Yes. Found something you might want to see." She sent the file. Curtis opened it, scanned through company records, employee archives, then paused. There, in a grainy ID photo from 2 decades ago, was a man named Henry Cohen, Lauren's father. Beside it, a termination notice dated the year Curtis graduated college. He hadn't known, hadn't remembered. His father had kept the fallout from him. The layoffs, the quiet settlements, the shattered lives. He looked down at his son, then out the window, then made a decision. The next morning, Lauren stepped out of the shelter's kitchen just as her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I didn't know what my father did, but I do now, and I'm sorry. Can we talk? Not as our families, but as us?" See, she stared at it for a long time. That evening, she met him, in the same park where the train passed overhead. Curtis was already there, waiting near a bench, hands in his coat pockets. No limousine, no suit, just him. Lauren approached slowly. "Hi," she said. "Hi." Neither of them sat down. "I read your message," she said. "I meant every word. My dad, he's not wrong," she said quietly. "Your family did destroy his life. Our life. I know. And I don't want to be anyone's lesson or apology." "You're not," Curtis said softly. "You're someone I can't forget. Someone my son still draws in crayon colors." That made her lips twitch barely. "I'm not looking for a savior, Curtis. I've survived this long without one. Then let me just be someone who walks beside you. No cape, no promises, just real." A breeze rustled through the trees. Lauren looked up at the sky, then at him. Her voice was quiet. "You know I can't trust easily." He nodded. "I'm willing to earn it slowly." They sat on the bench, in silence, not as millionaire and waitress, not as past and future, just two people, trying. The first time Lauren visited their home, she didn't know where to look. It wasn't a mansion in the flashy movie sense. There were no gold gates or marble lions, but it was vast, elegant, quietly expensive, the kind of place with high windows, wide hallways, and rugs so soft you forgot you were walking. She nearly turned around at the door, but then it opened, and Dylan was the one who greeted her. He didn't say anything, just handed her a crayon. Green. She smiled. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded and tugged her sleeve to pull her inside. Curtis met her in the hallway, dressed not in a suit, but in a hoodie and jeans. Still barefoot, still a little nervous. "You came," he said. She shrugged lightly. "He invited me." Dylan took her hand and led her straight to the living room, where a blanket fort stood like a glowing cave, complete with string lights and pillows. "He built it this morning," Curtis explained. "Said Ms. Dinosaur needed a safe base." Lauren laughed, surprised by how warm that made her feel. "He's the architect," Curtis added. "I just provided structural support." They spent the afternoon inside that fort, reading books, coloring new dinosaurs, and even inventing superhero names. Dylan called himself Captain Quiet. Lauren became Flashlight Girl. And Curtis? He was the hot chocolate wizard. It wasn't a date, but it was the closest Lauren had come to joy in years. Later that week, they visited the Science Museum. Curtis let her and Dylan roam while he hung back, watching the way they moved together, like they'd known each other longer than a few train rides and awkward glances. At the fossil exhibit, Dylan stared up at a towering T-Rex. "I bet he'd be less scary in a tutu," Lauren whispered. Dylan snorted, then drew it in his notebook, glitter pen and all. Curtis was amazed, not by the drawing, but by the sound. Dylan's laugh, out loud, clear and full. One evening, after Lauren helped Dylan fall asleep with a story about a dinosaur who conquered bedtime, she walked into the kitchen to find Curtis pouring tea. He handed her a mug without asking. They stood at the counter in silence, steam curling around their fingers. "He really likes you," Curtis said. "I like him too. You're good with him." Lauren stared into her cup. "I don't think I've ever been good with anything before." Curtis turned to her. "That's not true." She raised a brow. "You barely know me." He leaned slightly closer. "I know how Dylan looks at you, and how you make space for people without even trying." She exhaled. "That's not a skill. That's survival." "Maybe, But it's also love. She didn't say anything. Just looked down, the words sitting somewhere too deep for a reply. But she didn't move away. That weekend, they went to the park. Dylan ran ahead chasing pigeons while Curtis and Lauren sat on a bench, sharing a box of fries. It was the first moment they'd had completely alone. "I used to come here with my mom," Lauren said, "before things got hard." Curtis watched her closely. "She was the only person who believed I'd be something more than a statistic." "You already are," he said. She smiled, a little sad. "Most days, I still feel like the girl cleaning tables in the cafeteria." "You were never just that." Lauren looked at him. Really looked. "You say things like that and mean them." "I do." She studied his face, then whispered, "So why me?" Curtis hesitated, then answered carefully, "Because when everyone else tried to impress me, you talked to my son." He turned toward her, voice softer now. "You didn't care about money or power or any of the things people think matter." She tried to laugh, but it came out fragile. "And because," he added, "you gave away your only meal just to make a little boy feel seen." A silence settled. Not awkward, just heavy with feeling. Then she asked, barely audible, "Are you scared?" He nodded. "Yes, but not of you." "Of what then?" "Of what happens if I let myself hope again." Lauren looked down, then slowly reached over and took his hand. The next morning, Dylan showed her a new drawing. It was of 3 dinosaurs. One with a flashlight hat, one with a suit and tie, and one holding a crayon. At the bottom, written in careful block letters, "They belonged together." Lauren folded the paper and didn't cry, but she almost did. The note came in an envelope. No logo, no signature, just her name on the front, written in Dylan's careful block letters. Lauren. She found it tucked into the art supply cabinet at Maple Lane. The same place where Dylan had once handed her a drawing of a dinosaur in sunglasses. This time there was no sketch, just one folded piece of paper. Inside, the handwriting changed. Slanted, neat. Curtis's. "You once said you didn't want a savior, that you've survived this long on your own. I believe you, but if there's ever a moment, even one, where you want someone to stand beside you, not to fix you, not to carry you, just to witness your strength and remind you it's real, I'm here. No strings, no expectations, just one cup of tea, one story, one quiet evening. My door will be open. See." She read it twice, then a third time. She didn't fold it back. She just held it in her hand as she walked the children to music class, answered questions about markers, cleaned spilled juice. All the while, the letter pressed into her palm like something living. That night, Lauren stood in front of her bedroom mirror, wearing a sweater that had belonged to her mother. Soft, a little faded, but familiar. She stared at herself, at the girl who had once hidden in closets to cry, the girl who had patched her shoes with duct tape and dreams, the girl who had stepped onto a train just to escape a moment of hopelessness and borrowed a crayon from a quiet boy. Her reflection didn't look different, but something inside did. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the drawing Dylan had given her weeks ago, the one where she was Ms. Dinosaur. She smiled. The doorbell rang at Curtis's house around 7:15. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door and saw her standing there, clutching a thermos and a bag of cookies, he forgot how to breathe. "I didn't want to come empty-handed," she said. He stepped back, letting her in, heartbeat audible in his ears. "Dylan's upstairs, drawing dinosaurs with hats," Curtis said. He's been waiting. Me too, she whispered. They sat on the couch, side by side, not quite touching. Lauren poured tea into mismatched mugs. He noticed her hands weren't shaking. Not anymore. They talked. Not about pain or fear or broken families, but about little things. How Dylan liked to sleep under 3 blankets, even in summer. How Lauren once wanted to be a paleontologist before life got in the way. How Curtis learned how to braid because Dylan used to have a doll named Clara with tangled yarn hair. It was the simplest evening of her life, and the most sacred. Later, as she stood at the door ready to leave, she turned to him. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For letting me be seen without needing to be saved." He looked at her for a long time, then said, "You saved yourself, Lauren. I'm just grateful I got to witness it." She leaned forward, pressed a kiss to his cheek. Then, with a quiet breath, "I'd like to come back, not as a guest, but as me." Curtis didn't say anything. He just opened the door wider and smiled. The envelope was taped to her locker at Maple Lane. A small, square piece of brown paper with a green crayon doodle in the corner, unmistakably Dylan's. Lauren smiled as she peeled it open. Inside was a folded page from a sketchpad. No note, just a drawing. This time it wasn't a dinosaur. It wasn't a train. It was a trio of people standing under a tree. One had a flashlight on her head. One wore a hoodie and held a lunchbox. The third held a crayon. And underneath, in capital letters carefully printed, "Home." That weekend they rode the train again. Same route, same seats, same quiet hum. But this time, Dylan sat between them, giggling at Lauren's attempt to make up a new dinosaur story involving space helmets and spaghetti monsters. Curtis held a small paper bag on his lap. He handed it to Lauren wordlessly. She opened it. Inside, a set of professional colored pencils. Not new. Used. Loved. The case had initials etched in the corner, MC. She looked up. Curtis nodded. "My mother's. She used them in college. I found them in a box when we were clearing the attic." "I can't." "You don't have to. But they were hers. And she would have liked you." Lauren blinked fast, then reached over and touched his hand. "I'll take care of them." "I know." Later that night, as the train curved along the river and city lights blinked beyond the windows, Dylan leaned his head on her shoulder. "Are you staying this time?" he asked softly. Lauren's breath caught. She looked at Curtis. He wasn't watching her. He was watching his son. Gently, protectively, silently. She looked down at Dylan, at the boy who had first handed her a crayon, unknowingly handing her the beginning of everything. She pressed a kiss to his hair. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm staying." Somewhere in her coat pocket, the drawing crinkled as she shifted. The one that said home. And for the first time in a long time, that word didn't feel like a memory or a wish. Felt like now.